Welcome, everyone, and hello, Michelle Howard. My name is Myriam Hadnes, and we are here today at this LinkedIn Live to discuss about the foundations of facilitation. Hi, Michelle. You're
Hi.
my friend, colleague, repeated podcast guest on the Workshopswork podcast, and fellow facilitator, never done before. Before we dive into the topic, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. And thank you, everybody who's joined us, for your curiosity about what might be the foundations of facilitation. I'm joining you from Melbourne, Australia, and I've been working with groups for over 30 years and am really enjoying the process that Miri and I have been going through to drill down to the core of what is important for you to work at your best when you're working with groups. So thank you for joining us today.
And what I want to underline as well is that you have been in the facilitation business for over 2 decades, 25 years, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a depth of knowledge that you bring to the table and to this conversation today. Yeah, my name is
And
Myriam. Yes.
that is true, Miriam. I think one of the things that it brings to light, and for those of you who are listening, you'll be aware that, facilitation isn't a profession as such. And I like to think of it as one of the trades that you learn through exposing yourself to a range of different experiences and skill sets. That we learn facilitation by doing, we learn facilitation by watching others, and so that would be one of the things that I would love to be offering you if you decide that this facilitation course is something that you would like to join us in.
Yeah. And before we are going then, I would love to discuss a little bit more of what we would have wished to know about facilitation when we started. But maybe let's start at the beginning. We call this conversation and the course Foundations of Facilitation. What do we mean by foundations? So where does it all start when we talk about facilitation? What is it for you?
I really like that notion that we have to anchor ourselves in a few key things to be good facilitators. I think there are lots of tools and tricks and techniques that get thrown around, and I remember thinking early on as a facilitator that the more techniques I knew, the better facilitator I would be. Would I do open space? Would I do World Cafe? What were going to be the things I would do? I think there's something when we peel facilitation back that is much more central than that, that grounds us in our clarity about what we're doing, the way in which we manage the groups and the people that we are with, and the way in which we manage ourselves. So there are some important foundational things, and then we can spin off and decorate ourselves with as many techniques as we like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I agree. I think the foundations of facilitation start with ourselves and our mindset. How present we can be and show up, leave our own stuff at the door so that we can really hold space for the group. And at the same time, if we're only present for the group, even as good as our mindset is, we do need something. So what is the structure? How do we, so I think, and I wonder whether we can distinguish between activities and tools.
Yes.
Because yes, we have a box full of different activities like the open space, the World Cafe, the 1-2-4-all that we can do. And still there are some skills of how to guide a group conversation, how to make sure that all voices are heard. But I would differentiate from that.
And I think it's as much about what you do before you get in the room as what you do when you are in the room. And I think that's often where newer facilitators fall down is they put a lot of focus on how they'll have to be and what they'll do in the room. And it's the work that you do before around the clarity of your purpose and who you're working with and how you're going to make the process work for them that then enables you to step into the room with confidence and show up. Yeah.
And I think, yeah, let's stay there for a minute longer, because I think what happens before we step into the room is it's twofold. It's one, how you prepare the agenda and the flow. And I think beginner facilitator, they spend lots of time for that. And I remember that the closer to the workshop, the more I would work on the agenda, thinking that the more time I spent there, the more I would gain control of what will happen once I step in there. And nowadays, I spend maybe less time on the real crafting of the agenda, and more time aligning with the client, understanding what the purpose is, maybe helping them to find out what the purpose is, and speaking with the participants for this alignment.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because that touches on the role of the facilitator, yes, to partner well with the client, and also to be advocate for the participants. That, it's that question of who do we serve as a facilitator? Yes, we serve our sponsor or our client, whoever's invited us, and we serve the people that are showing up. So it's having the sensitivity and taking the time to understand that wider context that then enables you to step into the room and to be of service to the group, which is a common term that we hear all the time.
Yeah. And then also to know when it's time to step in and when it's time to step back. So if we realize that the group is not aligned with the purpose or with the hiring client, when is it a good moment to actually ask them whether what we have planned for the day is still the most relevant? And then it becomes very interesting, but that's maybe more than just the foundations of facilitation. That's maybe advanced facilitation of when to basically ditch the client and say, okay, for our profession and for our craft, we have to be in service for the group, and maybe do something that the client would not immediately agree with. Have you done that?
Have I done that? Have I ditched a client? Yes, I have ditched a client. And I think that is clearly a difficult thing to do. But if we want to have some integrity about how we approach things, and if we want to continue to build trust and reputation, then definitely there are times when what we are asked to do and what the group needs might be two different things. And if you can't negotiate that, then I think it is very difficult to step into the room with integrity. But I don't think we should scare people off with that. It's just more, yet another one of the layers of, and I was thinking of you speaking, where good facilitation can look quite invisible. Somebody who's facilitating well and has negotiated those things, it almost looks as though nothing is happening. Whereas in fact, we didn't need a facilitator after all. But when someone is facilitating well, the skill is very seamless and integrated. And so one of the things that I think is really important is to give people that confidence that they can negotiate, as you've said, a clarity of purpose, and that they can also then be sensitive when they step into the room to adapt as things go on. Because I think that's another mistake of beginner facilitators, is hanging on to a process even when it's not going well. And we've all been part of meetings and workshops where things haven't gone well. One of the things you've got to learn is that flexibility to adapt and go with whatever is presented in front of you.
Killing our darlings.
Yes.
Which even starts beforehand, right? So there are these agendas where I love every single activity that I have planned, and I realize that it's just too much. So which darling to kill? Thank you for, I just see that we have a LinkedIn user, someone watching us live. Thank you that good facilitation can be seen invisible. And I think this is where the foundations start. It's not we won't become invisible immediately. Even the best course won't prepare us for that. But I think to know that this might be the goal, and to know what it takes in terms of how we show up and how we communicate with the client beforehand. Because they're just beginner mistakes, I think, that we can avoid if we know about a set of questions that we want to bring to the table when we first meet the client. And I think the best we can prepare for that, and the best we know what potentially could go wrong, the better we can show up. And for me, this is part of the foundations.
Yeah, so I think what that points to for me is this idea that, and coming back to the term foundations, that there are some building blocks, for want of a better term, that give you that strength of ground to stand on to then build your own style as a facilitator. And so I know that, I mean, you and I are very different in a room. You know, we facilitate differently, and that's part of the beauty of the practice, is that there are all those different variations in style, but the fundamentals, I think, hold true. And for me, one of the things that I want people to walk away with is that confidence of the ground that they are standing on. So coming back to the example we raised before, so then if something goes wrong, you can still go back to your solid ground. You know, you're not going to be thrown off and get lost. Things won't fall apart. You can adapt and keep going.
Yeah. And you spoke about integrity before, and I think this is something that I've neglected in the beginning. How important it is to be aware of my own values as a facilitator, and so that then I can follow them almost like a North Star, and know when also to say no to a client or how to defend my boundaries. Because I only realized rather late how good it feels to stand on the ground with integrity, because I know that that not only feels wrong, it is wrong. And to have a set of rules almost, or guidelines for myself. And I think helping then beginning facilitators to find these North Stars is also good.
Yeah, and it comes back to that idea that there is freedom within structure. You know, we can create a scaffolding, which is, I think, what we are seeking to do with this course, create really strong scaffolding, and then within that, people can play, develop their own style, use different techniques, etc. You prompted me to think about something when you mentioned the term integrity, because I think in terms of one of the tricky things as a facilitator that we deal with is the notion of inequality and power in the room, and how in any organisation or group that you walk into, there will already be a way of operating, even if that isn't unspoken, and within that will be certain power structures, certain hierarchies, beliefs, assumptions about how people are going to behave. And that one of the things as facilitators that we need to do, and this comes back to integrity, is not buy into those existing assumptions and structures, but to challenge them, so that rather than a business as usual approach, we're actually showing the group that it can operate in a different way. It can be better, or people can be better than how they've been before. And that for me is an issue of integrity, is being able to gently tease those things out and challenge some of those assumptions.
Yes, yes. And for that, we really need to step into this room with the belief that the group has the knowledge and the power, and that nobody is better than the other in this context of a workshop. And I also think that, and this is again part of the foundations bit, I think, that there is also a design part. So, for instance, when clients, they always warn me about these participants. So at some point close to the workshop, there's always the conversation like, okay, let me tell you about this.
That you need to watch out for. Yeah.
And then they almost run you through the list of participants to make sure that you're prepared. And I actually love that. Although I will ignore the information because I think it's not useful, but it says a lot about the dynamics of the room. And what I like to reply is that we we can design in a way that there are no stages. So if there are always participants who are looking for a stage and will use the stage and then over domineer the group. And I think then it's our task as a facilitator, and that's part of the foundations, not to create these stages.
And I think that includes a stage for ourselves. And you and I have talked about this quite a bit, haven't we? That to be a good facilitator, you don't have to perform, you don't have to take the stage, you don't have to be a big personality. And that, again, for me, is about these foundational skills that anyone can learn and then practice. And then the overlay to that is those other things about your personality and your experience and your style and that sort of thing. So, yes, we're creating a space in which things can happen, where we're not just creating a stage for ourselves, but that used to be a lot of what I think facilitation was seen to be about, was a strong personality, raring everybody up and getting people, which is energy is important, but you don't have to put on a show. You can be you.
Yeah. You don't have to be loud to have a presence, and you don't have to dance to bring the energy back up. Yeah. I think just a change in speed of the conversation, maybe mixing them up, having them walk through the room and add comments in writing and changing groups. This can already change the dynamics and the speed.
Yeah.
What is it that you would have wished to know about facilitation when you started?
Well, I think that idea that you don't have to be a big showtime personality, because that's not my style as a human being. For me, the idea that I'm relating to a group of individuals as me, I wish that I had known that earlier on. It's taken me a while to learn that. I also think that, and I said this earlier on, that being hungry for different techniques and thinking that the more tricks and colourful things I had in my bag, the better a facilitator role would be. And that's fun. There's no doubt that pulling new things out of your bag like a magician is fun, but it's not the main game. And I think also the line or the delineation of what I as a facilitator take responsibility for and can influence, and what the group takes responsibility for and influence. That I'm not a parent, I'm not a teacher, I'm not a supervisor. And so, I think it's more, I'm more as a shepherd, to support the group to go where it needs to go, but not to stand there cracking a whip and directing traffic. I mean, you do need to do that sometimes. Groups can be rowdy, but primarily it's that idea, as you said, of being able to step in, but then also step back, because then the group learns about its own capacity, and people start to show up really differently, and maybe the quiet person is actually the one with the best idea. And when I turn away and people feel they aren't being watched, maybe that's when they get really creative. So I think the capacity to let go is also really important. What about you? What do you wish you'd known? I mean, we're still learning. That's the other thing too. We don't know it all yet.
That's the beauty of it, right? I think similar. I wish I had known that it's not so much about the activities, and that it's okay to change gears and to change the plan once we step into the space. And I think that I can also trust my intuition. I think I wish I had known that groups follow. If we can ask them the craziest things to do, and they will follow. And I think I remember one situation very clearly. I prepared kind of a it was almost like a turn to your neighbor moment, but with a little bit more depth. And so an intimate conversation in trios. And I remember that I started the session and then I looked at the participants who showed up and I thought, oh, I cannot do that. They won't go there. It's too touchy-feely. And I decided not to do it. And it has changed the entire course of the session, because I think I signaled myself and indirectly to them that I don't trust them to go deep. And I remember different afterwards, different situations where I had this fear, like, oh, can I really do that? And I was like, okay, I decided to do that. I can. The group will go there. And then the opposite, the group really showed up. Yeah, stood up and showed up with vulnerability.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that often the more trust we show in the group, the more they will step forward and sort of elevate themselves and what they contribute, which, sort of makes me think about one of those foundational skills, which is how, as facilitators, we create a space, and we talk about safe space, but we create that safety that people do think they can take a risk, that they do think they can show up as themselves, that they don't have to play a role, even if their boss is in the room, that we create the opportunity for people to show up at their best.
Yes.
And I think that's a real skill, so that people aren't leaving anything in the tank. They're bringing absolutely the best of themselves to the table.
Yeah. And I think there's, thank you for bringing that up. There's for me, a differentiation between beginning facilitators or non-facilitators who do facilitate groups, and facilitators, capital F. Telling versus showing. I've been in so many sessions where the air quotes facilitator said, this is a safe space. You can be yourself. I'm like, who are you to tell me that this is a safe space? Show me.
Yes.
Let me feel that it's safe, and then I will follow. And I think the foundation of facilitation is not to tell people, but to show them, also to guide them into an experience, and then ask them to reflect on their own learnings instead of telling them, okay, so this is what you are going to experience. This is what you're going to learn, or this is the piece of theory, and now let's do it. I think this always backfires in adult education or adult work.
Yes.
Whereas when we give them a little bit of a prompt, explain the activity, let them experience it, and then debrief, we also empower them.
And I think that's reflected in the way that we are structuring this course, because it's not a talk over slides kind of a telling people what to do course, but again, providing this safe ground or platform of key things, and then lots of experiential work. And that, I think, is where the magic happens, where people are getting to ask the questions, practice stuff, do activities that bring things to life, and that grounds, coming back to it, grounds the skills, so that people walk away feeling that much more confident.
Yes, in their own facilitation, that they can show up as themselves and don't have to be someone else. And I think that's also the beauty of having a live course. So it's not pre-recorded, no videos to watch, to come and show up, because then we can also work with what's in the room. So what are the case studies that the participants bring in, and how can we react to that, and how can we enrich the foundations, the theory, or the body of knowledge, by the case studies that we are brought. And I think some of the ones that always come back, and that we'll definitely spend time with, not only talking but also practicing and really reflecting what's our way to deal with it, are these group dynamics, how to deal with the dominant participants and the silent ones, and maybe the clients who ask us to do more than feels good for us.
And the scary moments stuff where there's conflict or where there's resistance or where what you try first just hits a wall, so I think too it's the capacity to be in the moment, and yes, to have some skill sets to deal with those things, but to be in the moment and not to be put off when things don't go to plan.
And maybe, would you mind sharing a situation maybe where conflict came up in one of your sessions, where maybe one of the participants put into question what is being done or doesn't want to be there? And what are good ways to react to that or to work with it, with this energy?
I've had that experience all along a spectrum of, because I deal with in the work that I do, I deal a lot in high conflict situations, both within organisations and in a community context. And so I guess for me, one of the first things that I would do in a group is to do what we've talked about, which is to make it safe for people to show up how they are. But then if it's complete resistance, which I've also experienced, so I've experienced people turning up for, and this is in random public sessions, for a completely different reason than what is provided, is rather than block that and invalidate people, is I think one of the most important things is to validate what people need and why they're there. And I can think of one particular instance where that actually meant running 2 separate meetings at the same time for 2 separate purposes. So that we had our original meeting going ahead in one room, and I had a little rebel group of people meeting about something else in another room. So, I think I've realised that as much as I can demonstrate other ways of behaving, I can create the possibility of something new. I'm also not there to change everybody. And so what is most important is that whoever shows up feels like they have got their needs met. And so my flexibility to respond to that in whatever way I need to is the key kind of skill set there.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the example with the rebel group. For me, this shows that there is not one way of doing things, of fixing things. And as you say, we are not coming to a session to fix anyone anyway. But then, yes, we can have all these solutions or possibilities or ways to react to a situation. We can have them all learned. And still, sometimes we just follow our gut. And I've never read in a facilitation book, okay, in such a case, just
follow your gut.
Follow your gut, maybe, but I never read the explicit idea of open another breakout room and run a parallel meeting for the rebel group.
For the rebel group.
And still, in a specific situation, it can be so helpful.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, and you and I've talked about this a lot as well, is that often the pushback that happens in a meeting is because people have a history about how they've been treated. I'm going to show up and people won't trust me, or I'm going to show up and my opinion won't be valued, or I'm going to show up and, I'm the only young female in the group, so everybody's going to talk over the top of me. So when people bring that history into the room, we've got to have enough wherewithal to show that that is not how things are going to operate, and to diffuse that kind of suspicion and hesitancy as much as we can.
Which can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
I believe that everyone is treating me in a diminishing way because I'm the youngest female. Then yes. I will interpret everything that's being said through that lens, and then it becomes reality. And then, of course, I react in a passive-aggressive way to everything that's thrown at me.
Yeah.
And I think the way to diffuse that is, maybe setting ground rules at the beginning to explain very clearly how we expect the group to to communicate and to interact with each other, to role model it through our behavior. And then I think, for me, the best way to create this safe space that everyone talks about is to, yes, and participants, as you say, to validate the experience. Because I think the worst thing, and that's what we all, and maybe that's why it's so painful, because we have all experienced it as children, where
Yes.
we are told, oh, you're not supposed to be angry, or there is no reason to be sad. Don't be sad. It's not so bad. So basically, our feelings and emotions have constantly been dismissed. And I think the biggest favor we can do to a group and difficult participants is to acknowledge their emotions and say, yeah, bring them in, that it's okay.
One of the best compliments I ever got was when people said, thank you for the workshop. You showed us a different way to operate as a group. And so it's interesting because we often wonder as a facilitator, particularly if you're freelance and you move in and out, whether you make any sort of difference at all, and you're there for such a fleeting amount of time. But when you know that you can actually model a different way of operating and people go, oh, that's actually better than what we've been doing, that's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's, I think, something we often forget, and that's maybe also something that I wish I'd known when I started. There are always two components to every intervention we facilitate. One is the output and one is the outcome.
Yes.
So what is the reason that a client might have hired us? So at the end, something tangible they can walk away with. And then what is it, the outcome? Something where we have left maybe some inspiration or hope that things can be different.
And again, when we're there often for a very fleeting period of time, that notion that how can we, and again, this is something that I want to work with people in the course, how can we build the kind of trust and glue for a group that sticks when we're gone?
Yeah.
Because there's no point people invest a lot of money and time in a workshop, and it might not be a decision-making workshop. It might be brainstorming or strategy. We don't know. But making sure that whatever you do with the group will stick once you're gone. It's not just something that is okay for the time that you're in the room and then forgotten once you've left.
Yeah, absolutely. So we spoke a little bit about the course already. So you have been running a foundations course for the Never Done Before community with different names. I think it started off as Seedlings.
Yes,
Course
to grow the seeds, yes.
Exactly, when it was still the greenhouse, where Never Done Before with the greenhouse. Last year, it was the incubator. So to incubate new facilitators into the world of facilitation. And now we are together tweaking it a little bit, bringing it to the next level, and more importantly, opening up to the public. Because the reason you're doing it again for the Never Done Before community for the third time is because some of our members are coming to the course a third time because there's always something to learn.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think what we've done is really honed in on these key things that people need to be aware of and implement and integrate in their practice, regardless of the context. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a corporate, doesn't matter whether you're in a community context. We've got people who work in, arts therapy and coaching. The context, in a way, is to the side. There's a core framework of skills that kind of hold true. Continuing to practice them, it doesn't matter how long you've been facilitating. Coming back to those foundational skills. It's like me as a swimmer. I want to go and refine my swim stroke so I can be better at what I do. I think it's the same with facilitation, that we keep taking ourselves back to these core skills, and that's a really useful thing to do.
Yeah. And always depending on who is in the space, who is also in the group with whom we learn. we'll always win another layer, another perspective, and another level of depth to our practice. So, yeah.
And yeah, no, I was just going to add, and I think it's been so exciting in the Never Done Before community and with this course, being global, being a global platform, the richness of experience and the diversity of things that people bring. That might be a different cultural lens. It might be a different context that people are working in. That's really exciting, and it kind of blows things out to all sorts of different possibilities.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point, because in the other course that we're hosting at the moment, it's Leadership Through Facilitation, where we really distinguish who is the audience. Are they facilitators? Are they managers, team leaders? Because leadership shows up very differently, whether you're working with a group that are your peers or your direct reports or a group of strangers. And in this course, our foundations course, it really doesn't matter, because it's about the foundations of the craft, independent of whether you deal with your teammates at the same level, your direct reports, or in a group context if you're an outside external facilitator.
Can we share a little bit?
Yes, I am trying to. Yes, here we go. So we have 5 weeks, 5 modules, and everything starts with a why. Do you want to speak to the why?
I love this one. I think it's the one that we take for granted, because often we get presented with a reason for the meeting or a reason for the workshop that hasn't been well interrogated. And in fact, I'll take it one step further. Often we get given this is what we need to do, like a to-do list. So we need to present this, then we need to get ideas on this, then we do. But the actual real reason for the conversation or the work isn't clear. And I think often where workshops and meetings go off the rails is where the participants particularly aren't connected with the why or the purpose. So they are not buying in to what's going on, and then it becomes really difficult to do a good job. So that first piece of work that we do together is looking at how we can interrogate the why, how we can get clarity around that and alignment between participants, clients, sponsors, and that then starts to shape what we might do with the group, rather than starting with the doing and then thinking about the why, or why haven't we got there.
Yeah. And then the question is, once we're clear on the why, so how are we doing that? So this is everything about the flow, the workshop design. And I think what is part of the foundations, what helps me until today actually, is my workshop blueprint. I always start in the same way how I open Session Lab or whatever agenda planner tool you're using. And then I put in, okay, the first 10 minutes is introduction, saying hello, turn to your neighbor. At the end, check out harvesting, departing, next steps. And then I fill in the steps in between. And I have a very specific way of doing that I always ask myself, where do I want to land, which is informed by the why, and what do I need in a previous activity that will help me land there? And then it's a kind of backward induction of how do I have to structure every single bit of the process so that the group smoothly moves towards their goal. And this is what we'll explore in the how module, how to design a workshop independent of the million activities we could do.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Once people have got mastery of that flow, then the creativity about what you're going to do can start. So I think the beauty of this course is that we can set up quite a simple structure or simple flow, and then elaborate on that depending on the size of your group or your particular creativity as a facilitator. You start to kind of fancy it up in a way that really makes it work for you. Yeah.
And I think what we will definitely touch upon is the balance between structure and emergence.
Yes.
So yes, we design our workshops, and this is something that we do very differently. My workshops are minute by minute planned, and as soon as I step into the room, it's on me to sense where can new things emerge and where do I have to stick to the structure that I've planned. And I think that's a very juicy conversation that we'll have in the course because it's part of the foundations.
Yeah. And I think it's to people's benefit that we have those different styles because they work and they work differently. And I think what it does is watching people with two different styles gives you permission to then explore your own. So, yeah. Power dynamics, tricky.
The what?
The what?
What are we doing in the space?
So I think that's interesting, isn't it? The notion of how groups work together and the fact that groups do have a dynamic and a shape, that people play different roles, that once you recognise those different roles and allow for them all, you know, that even the nagging person that constantly asks questions has a role to play, but it's how we actually manage that and how our processes are inclusive to all of those different learning styles and approaches, and that all of those different ways of showing up are actually valued.
Yeah. And the other side of the same coin is then the who of who are the people in the space and how can we navigate through the conflict or the difficult conversations, and how can we stand in the or can be aware of power and bias, and how can we create an inclusive space and safe space without saying this is inclusive and space and safe, but really shaping it. And I think understanding the different types of personalities that will show up and how they are all important. Because I think we're very quick in labeling people as the difficult participants.
Yeah.
Although the only thing that makes them difficult is us. Because themselves in their vacuum,
They're fine.
they're fine, they're happy, but as soon as we step in, they become difficult for us. So what does it say about us, about our biases, and how can we actually use this energy for the benefit of the group? Because I think very often also participants are taking a specific role in the space to fill a void and to balance out the dynamics. And I think once we understand how this functions, it's easier to step into and to stand in the fire.
And speaking of fire, I think one of the things that facilitators can often be paralysed by is conflict. I know that I was initially. You know, I saw conflict as being this huge insurmountable problem and often something that was a negative, whereas now for me, and we'll talk about this in the course, the idea that maybe conflict is that interesting friction point that leads to innovation or creativity. So flipping the lens on conflict and shifting it from being just a difficult problem to being actually an opportunity to push through to something new, and the courage and the skill that you need to have as a facilitator to manage that, to get to the other side. That I think is one of the really interesting points of that particular discussion.
Yeah. Which then leads to the you.
Yeah.
So
and this is my favourite bit, as you know. You know, I think, again, having worked for a long time in lots of different circumstances, and, you know, I was thinking the other day how, yes, I've facilitated in big formal congress situations, and then I've also, you know, facilitated out in the bush, in the dirt, with no structure and things that that go very much in a free-flowing way. That the constant in all of that is me and how I show up, which sounds obvious, but it's actually difficult to maintain because we're human too. You know, we get triggered, our buttons get pushed, we panic. Am I good enough? Can I manage this situation? Oh, that person reminds me of my mother. You know, whatever is going on for you at the time, how do you make sure that you stay grounded and present and available to do the best job that you possibly can, and also bring all of the interesting energy and experience and things that you have, so that you are facilitating with all of yourself, not just the little narrow slice that is labelled, facilitator, trainer, whatever you want to call yourself. So I love that topic. It's my favourite.
And that's why it's also nice to have it at the end, where we have learned all the foundations, the tools, the structures, and then it's how can we then have the confidence to really show up as our true selves and with authenticity, because I think the moment we are not authentic or we try to be someone we are not, it's a risk to the safe space, because then also the participants wonder, am I good enough? Or do I have to be someone else?
So if I can capture, I think that what I would call the exquisite tension between there's not a precise recipe. Facilitation is not like cooking a cheese souffle. It's not the precise recipe, but there are some things that from our experience we know work. And then I think from there, it's like a good jazz musician. You start to be able to improvise and work with what is in front of you. So that's what I would like to be able to offer people, is that real strength of foundation, and people can then, like a good guitarist or musician, riff off that and take their facilitation where it needs to go.
Yeah, because there's a musician, there's the instrument, there's a band, but then there's also musicality.
Yes.
And all of that makes a good jazz musician or facilitator.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. My mother was a musician, and she used to make me practice my scales up and down the piano, which was so deadly boring. And yet, when you realise you have to have those basics in hand to then be able to do something bolder or something different. So, yeah. Good on Mum for making me practice.
Yeah, and I realized it when I dance swing. So in Lindy Hop or swing dance, you need to have the move and the musicality. And then in between that, you can experiment, you can improvise. And the art is to improvise without getting, and either inviting your partner to improvise with you, or to improvise in a way that it doesn't disturb the other one.
Which is a great analogy for facilitation, because we often talk about it being a dance between the facilitator and the group. And just as you've talked about partnering, I think that's what we do, isn't it? As facilitators, we need to work out when we step forward and lead, and when we step back and allow the group to lead. It's a really nice analogy for the way that we need to have that sensibility to what is going on.
Which now makes me think that we actually would need a separate course on co-facilitation, because that's such a big, wide topic of how can we improvise while staying in connection and not losing the group. But this will be for another time. It's not the fun. Yes, little tangent. So what's next? We will start in a month from now, April 2nd. We'll meet every week for 5 weeks for 2 hours. And we have 3 different tiers. So either the basic tier, it's just a course, once per week, 2 hours on Tuesday mornings in Europe or evenings in Australia or APAC, Asia. And I really strongly recommend, because I see the impact now in the leadership course, the deep dive, where every week we will meet to answer all of the questions. So it's more of a group coaching where we bring in cases where everything that is present will be dealt with. So a weekly Q&A on Thursdays for 1.5 hours, where we'll be in service for you. And then there's the option of the full immersion, where not only you get the weekly Q&As, but you also get one-on-one coaching sessions with Michelle and with me separately, fitting your own schedule. And the best of all is if you decide to join us and you make the decision before Friday this week, you get a 15% discount. So if you visit the website, neverdonebefore.org/courses/foundations course, you will see the sale price right there.
And Myriam, can I just add to that we're committed to this group being intimate enough that we will get to know one another and work together. You're not going to be in a Zoom room with 75 other people. So, we really, this is the quality of the experience is paramount for us. So for those people who get nervous in big groups or feel like they maybe won't get the attention they need, I just want to reassure everybody that it's the quality of the experience that is important to us.
Yeah, I expect 10 to 15 participants. So it will be small because we're just launching. So benefit from the beauty of being the first and get our full attention. And this was the wrong button. And for those who are actually suffer from Zoom fatigue, guess what? Michelle is coming to Amsterdam. And we said, if we're designing and hosting this course online anyway, why not using the same content and filling 2 beautiful days with it? So you can meet us in Amsterdam on June 6th and 7th. 2 days of training, uncovering the foundations of facilitation. Michelle and I will be there. And if this is of interest, please reach out. We haven't put up the website yet. So this is very fresh.
And then enjoy 2 beautiful days exploring Amsterdam over the weekend.
Yeah. This place is beautiful. It's right next to the city center in the Bloemengracht. Wonderful. And if there are no more questions, I would say we hope to see you in April or in June to discover the foundations of facilitation and grow your own facilitation skills.
And I just want to say, I think facilitation is such a current skill for the circumstances that we are dealing with now. And for those of you who know that you've got to work more collaboratively with your team, who know that you've got to engage more broadly, who know that you've got to build the confidence of a range of stakeholders, this is a skill set that is really going to stand you in good stead. We love it, and we're really looking forward to sharing those things with you. Thank you for joining us.
See you soon.